said. But these emotions makes us believe that it's regular to happen. It's been happening all the time, so we accept the death, the people who's been killed in Palestine, because it's fine. But on the other side, you see the Israel side, they're just saying, oh, they're hostage. It's how the hell they're hostage? We demand for Hamas to just bring those people back to their homes. But on the other side, it's okay. They're twins. They're dead. It's part of the story.
You said it very clearly, by the way. I really agree, but I might even go slightly further and say what I see in this report is more colonial evidence of, look at the emotional Arabs, they're not rational enough.
That's true.
Did you notice that the Israeli people were calm and rational?
Yeah.
And that supports the stereotype of race that is colonial and Orientalist, which we'll be talking about next week. But yes, Any other points or questions that anybody wants to raise? Anybody else? Okay, well, let's go back to, obviously I'll show you the other clip at the end of the lecture, but let's go back to the lecture notes. And obviously, any time, please just interrupt, raise your hand if there's anything that I say that doesn't make sense. So we're going to stay with a historical context. And as I said to you already, the theory for media effects, it grew up in the 1950s and 60s. It was the time in science research or sociological research of behaviorism. Now, behaviorism is a slightly outdated social theory that humans are like animals, and you may have heard of somebody called Pavlov and the Pavlov dog. And what happens in this experiment is the dog learns that if a bell is rung, then it gets food. And what happens is that basically the association for the dog is the sound of the bell is food. So that's a behavioral effect. It's a direct effect. Yeah. Now, as I say, this theory is out of date, but I wonder whether it just needs updating. But we'll come to that in a minute. And I'm trying to leave open a space where I'm not telling you what to think. I'm trying to do that. So sometimes if I come across like I'm not sure about what I'm saying, it's actually because I don't want to be sure about what I'm saying. So historically, we know that modernization, since the Enlightenment and since the migration of people from countryside to cities, has broken up traditional communities. And so mediatization is part of this. So we can make this very general, big historical statement that the rise of media in the 20th century and the continuity into the 21st century of social media has actually led to increasing isolation and anonymity in media audiences. And this is in contrast to what we were saying about, the ideal version of the global media village that's assisted by digital technology. So, and is in line with broadly a Marxist perspective that media causes alienation. Yeah. Why is it that we have these devices that are supposed to connect us but are actually feeling more lonely? Why is that? Because traditional society has broken down, right? And this is the historical perspective behind media effects. So media effects, because it sees the media and new media as so powerful, regards audiences as vulnerable. So every time there's a new media invention, so we've traced it already, didn't we, way back in the first lecture, from cinema, through television, through video, through, satellite TV, through the internet. Every time, and the latest one is the internet, we have this big panic about the media is, the internet is corrupting our children, it's corrupting our culture. It's called a moral panic, right? So each new medium produces a moral panic, and there's a particular concern in moral panics about the media causing violence. And Media Effects is very concerned with violent media affecting the behaviour of violent human beings, causing human beings to be more violent. So we can say historically that this idea of moral panics, it shapes the research agenda. Why? Because governments like to think that the media is to blame for everything. So they like to think that, okay, crime is on the rise. It can't be anything to do with capitalism or government policy, so they blame it on the media. So governments in general in the Western world are in favour of media regulation to combat powerful media effects. But as Barker and Petley put it in their research, panics deflect political attention from social problems. Yeah? So we're back to that old question. Does the media reflect violence or does it construct violence? Yeah? This is in line with what we said about the Frankfurt School and the culture industry from the perspective of Adorno and Horkheimer. Just to refresh your memories, they argue that manufactured culture pacifies the masses. That's a media effects argument. They argue that manufactured culture, it discourages, it makes us all stupid. It produces ideological domination. So there's no essential conflict between Frankfurt School, political economic approaches, Marxist approaches, and media effects theory. Okay, so political economic research on media effects is very concerned with media industry, not so much with audiences. And it's concerned with, it assumes that it's the same effect on everybody, and it assumes that the power of the media is strong. Maybe it's just weak. We don't know yet. Let's talk about that later. But here's the main problem. The main problem is that very little media effects research is actually on audiences themselves. So media effects research looks at media production, the power is in the message, but it doesn't look at the different responses like you two had to the BBC clip that I just showed you just now. Just a little bit more about behaviorism. There's a classic historical experiment. This goes back to the 50s and 60s called the Bobo doll experiment. Does anyone know what Bobo doll is? So Bobo doll is a big doll, it's inflatable, it's got a big base, and you can knock it and it just bounces up again. And it's been used in a very crude way for behavioural research on media effects. Why? What they did was they got children in a laboratory to watch adults being rewarded, so adults as the role models for children, being rewarded for watching violent media. And then they put the doll, so they would see a picture of an adult punching the doll, right? Then they would get the child to have to interact with the doll, and nearly always the child would be would copy the adult and like, especially if it was a boy, would want to punch it. And of course they did the same thing, experiment without violence, and it didn't, obviously there was no violent effect on the children hitting the doll. So there was loosely speaking evidence for a direct emotional effect on children of violence. In the laboratory, a direct effect. Yeah? Not an indirect effect, a direct effect. So the conclusion was that exposure to rewarded violence affects human behaviour. And this is often used by governments to justify regulation and censorship because of media violence, and as I've said to you already, because of social violence, it means that governments can blame the media and they don't get blamed themselves, generally speaking. What's the problem with media effects research experimental research behaviourism. Oh my God, what happened to the time? We're going to go over a little bit today, okay? I hope you can all stay a bit longer. So, clearly, if you start measuring media effects in a laboratory, in a scientific setting context, that's not a real context, is it? We don't watch the media in a laboratory, do we? So, it's important, arguably, to actually observe and participate with media audiences living with the media. It's an artificial context. Now you might agree, you might disagree, that's up to you. The danger of media effects behavioural research is it only focuses on short-term direct effects on behaviour. It doesn't focus on long-term or indirect effects. And even though it does produce results that indicate a correlation between media violence and human violence, audience violence, it's indeterminate results, which means it's not always true. It's not 100%. So then we move on in time to the 60s and 70s, and well, maybe I should say the 70s and 80s primarily. There's no key year, but this is when Stuart Hall started his very important, interesting research on audiences and adopted a more, what we're going to call a liberal pluralist approach to study audiences. And this is what we call active audiences. So this is when we flip it over and we say, is the audience powerful, right? Because why do we assume that we're all stupid? Why do we assume that the media has the same effect on everybody? Clearly, these clever Frankfurt School people, for example, you know, they're also audiences, and they know it's ideological. And also, you know, so it's really important that we see media effects and we think about media power from the perspective of audiences, not audiences as victims, not audiences as passive. So, interpersonal influence. Now so basically, I'm going to make some huge generalizations, but generally speaking, what this new research that historically followed the media effects research revealed is that the way the media affects us is not just the media has a direct effect on us, it's the way we interact with other people talking about the media. So, for example, if you watch something very good that you loved, that you thought was really good, next day you'll talk to somebody about it, or something that really offended you or shocked you. And actually the person that you speak to will have an effect on what you think about the media. It's not as simple as to say the media just makes us into stupid, violent beings. So this is what we call opinion leaders are more influential than the media. What are opinion leaders? They're educators, they're teachers, they're parents. Yes, they're public intellectuals. They have just as much power, if not more power, on how you interpret the media. I might go so far as to say, I might have an effect on you, more. I might, in my egoistic, narcissistic self, might think, oh, I'm having a very powerful effect on these students, and they're never going to see the media the same again, you know? But there might be some truth in it, who knows? You know, not me. Anyway, so liberal pluralists say that the media has limited effects. They change the focus and they ask the question, what does the media do to people? Sorry, not what the media does to people, but what do people do with the media as active agents? Agents who can resist ideology, agents who can actively interpret, agents who can understand, agents who can produce their own media. Right. This also corresponds to another area, loosely speaking, of active audience research, which is called uses and gratifications. Uses and gratifications theory, in a nutshell, again, the research focus is on what is the emotional gratification for audiences. So instead of saying, and think about the clip that I just showed you, you might, from an active audience perspective, ask yourself the question, well, it's pretty disturbing news, but why do we watch it? What's our gratification? What does it give us as audiences to watch horrible suffering in the Middle East? Yeah? It's a different way of looking at it. Before I show you the last clip, just a few points about uses and gratifications theory. which is, as I say, it's essentially the same as active audience, but just focusing on uses and gratifications. It focuses on individuals exclusively, whereas media effects focuses on groups, sameness, groups. What uses and gratifications theory does is it separates individuals from society, and it doesn't look at the attention that audiences pay. Sorry, it doesn't look at the text themselves that individuals use. That would be a media effects approach. So media effects looks at the text, it looks at the ideology, and it says this is biased because it does this. That's not what uses and gratifications does. So this 1970s Stuart Hall influenced theory is very much influenced by literary studies, by anthropology, ethnography, Gramsci, the Italian theorist. And as I said to you, there was a general trend in media research of actually media researchers, media anthropologists would actually go and live with families in Indonesia and watch and note and write down and observe and participate. So they would be involved in their research, not this special scientific godlike perspective, I'm outside the research, I know what the truth is. Yeah? So what is the encoding decoding model? It's one of the most famous media theories that Stuart Hall produced. And again, I'm glossing, I'm going very quickly, but obviously anybody who's interested in this can follow up and get more detail if she or he wishes. But the assumption is that the media don't have direct effects on people. Media texts are encoded, that means they're produced with specific messages by their producers. And Stuart Hall says that we need to focus on the institutions that produce the texts as well as the assumptions of the producers. Media text must be decoded, interpreted, understood, in order to be understood. So he's looking at, yes, power. So Stuart Hall doesn't say media effects is rubbish. He kind of likes some Marxist assumptions, but he says there's just as much power in audiences as there are in media producers. So it's a more complex theory, I would argue. You may have a different idea. It obviously disagrees with behavioralism, which was the historically the theory that came before historically. And what Stuart Hall was concerned about is that hitherto media effects theory didn't really take into account the social context of media reception, the culture, the religion, how different races, ages, sexualities, genders, classes all interpret the media differently. Yeah? So media messages are likely to be interpreted and decoded according to a worldview and social circumstances, social class, gender, education, occupation. And he came up in his research with 3, broadly speaking, different interpretations of a text. Number 1, if the audience has a dominant reading, they accept it. It's true. There's no criticism. Number 2, if they negotiate the truth of the text, they agree with some of it, partially. Thirdly, they might oppose the text. They might think it's rubbish. Right? David Morley, he just basically used the same critical research approach as Stuart Hall, and he deliberately selected a British audience of a current affairs programme called Nationwide, and what he realised is exactly in the same way that Stuart Hall had already proved, that there were these 3 broadly different approaches to the media: negotiated, dominant, and oppositional. And that's why I'm going to play you the last clip in a moment, and we'll see if it has the same effect on you guys. I think it makes sense. Let's just quickly look at the time. Yeah, I'll finish the lecture ideas, and then we'll end with the clip, and hopefully you can ask 1 or 2 questions. So as I said to you before, active audience is ethnography. Ethnography is participant observation. That's why I've switched the camera around, right? Because I'm trying to participate with you today. I think I do anyway, but in a more obvious way, yeah? So that we're all in it together. Reception analysis rather than effects research. Okay, so there's two key areas of active audience theory. There's something that's called reception analysis, and there's something that is called uses and gratifications. I'm not terribly concerned that you understand the difference, but if you do want to know the difference, it's as follows. So reception analysis, it focuses on different interpretations. It focuses on media and social relations within the home. And one very interesting example, but there are many, many of them, is this guy called Daniel Miller, way back in 1997. His research was on audiences of a really cheesy, rubbish American soap opera called The Young and Restless that was shown to audiences in Trinidad. Very, very obviously American rubbish. And what was interesting is that the audience did not think this is American rubbish. The way they interpreted it was, this is representing the power of our government. So they didn't represent it as a model of American culture. They changed it, they hybridized it into, this is what's happening in our government, which is a very interesting active audience response. So they weren't brainwashed into thinking American culture is more important than my home culture. They translated it into their own culture. They translated it. So that's an active audience approach. So let's watch the last clip, and same as the first clip, the BBC clip. Any questions before I do that? Because I know I'm mindful that I'm rushing. Anything that I said that you didn't understand?